Hello, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History, where we're going through the contracts of Elvis Presley, signed, sealed, and remembered. And on today's episode, Elvis is going to get insured. It's not the first time he's ever been insured. We'll see that in the paperwork, but it's the first time we're going to see the paperwork. In the last episode, we saw Elvis's report card from when he was in third grade, and we saw that he was excellent in in everything. He got E's or an E- in everything. Hello, Terry. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here. As always. Hi, Angel. Thank you so much for coming. Also appreciate having you here. And before we get into exactly what we're going to look at today, we've got to get Elvis from where he was in the third grade over to this house where there's going to be some insurance that we're going to take a look at. And so I don't have a visual for this. At some point, I'm going to make a map so that we can take a tour around Tupelo and see all the locations that I'm about to talk about. But for now, I'm just going to list them out. And I don't think they've ever been listed out in exactly this order or this completely before. So you guys will be some of the first Elvis fans to ever hear this in the order in which Elvis moved to each of these addresses. And we'll start out with the birthplace. We all know where that's at 306 Old Saltillo Road. And in a previous episode, we saw that next to that house was the big house. And that's where Minnie Mae and Vernon's father, Dee Presley, lived, as well as their daughter, Nash Presley, who used to play with Elvis when he was little, up to about the age of 3. Of course, she played with him after that, but they lived next to each other until Elvis was about the age of 3. Hello, Anna. Thank you so much for coming. Definitely appreciate having you here. And then next to Dee and Minnie Mae were Sales and Annie Presley, who were Noah Presley's kids. Well, his son and his daughter-in-law. That was Sale's wife and Gladys's best friend at the time. And Noah lived very close by. He was at 1220 Kelly Street, which you saw that the house was up on a hill. We saw those pictures. You could see the house up on top of the hill. You could see a portion of the big house next to it. If you turned around and looked slightly to the south, you would see Uncle Noah's house on Kelly Street, because that's where Kelly Street is, and he was right there on the corner. So he was very, very close. Which means Sales, his son, was very close. And the grandkids that Annie was having for Noah, very close. The Assembly of God Church, which you can see on the Elvis Presley, it's at the Elvis Presley birthplace site now. It's a little ways away from the chapel. The chapel's where Annie described her house as being. The Assembly of God Church was moved to the birthplace. It was on 102 Adams Street, which was just, again, this was another place you could almost see from the hill. So very, very close, within easy walking distance. Hi, Martha. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And then, as we know, Vernon went off to prison. And while he was in prison, Gladys, something happened with the birthplace, and she left it. And my theory is that she pressured Orville Bean into writing the letter that went in December 1939 to the governor, and got Vernon released in early 1940. So she moved out and lived with, we saw evidence from different people's recollections that she had moved into the big house with Dee and Minnie Mae for a little while. And then she also lived with her cousin Frank Richards. So my theory is she moved in with Dee and Minnie Mae, knew that she couldn't stay there forever, wanted to go someplace that was her own relations, not the Presleys, somebody on the Smith side. And she went to her cousin Frank Richards, who lived at 510 and a half Maple Street. Again, this was a very close address. So again, within walking distance. Then Vernon comes back from prison. They live with Frank and his wife for a little while. But, you know, Frank, he's had a responsibility now for Gladys and Elvis for quite a while. Vernon's getting back on his feet, and Vernon's a Presley. So he decides, or they decide, we don't know how they decided, but they moved in with some Presleys. And these would be Vester and Cletus Presley. So not only is it a brother of Vernon, it's a sister of Gladys, because Vester and Cletus are married, but they are also, Vester is Vernon's brother and Cletus is Gladys's sister. And they used to date the opposite way. Vester used to date Gladys and Vernon used to date Cletus. But at some point there was a flippy flop, and they all ended up married to each other in this manner. So they're living with Vester and Cletus, and this is at 1250 Reese Street in Tupelo. Again, a place that's not real far away. And they lived there for most of 1940. But in November 1940, they end up moving back in with Frank. So Frank gets them again. So I don't know whether they just were out there welcome with Vester and Cletus, or maybe there were some hard times for Vester at that point that required that they go, or I know Vernon, you know, I haven't really lined everything up with Vernon's jobs. And I know that he had some jobs that maybe took him away from Tupelo, and maybe during that period, Gladys would have preferred to live with her relatives. So I don't know why they made this move, but they did. And then from 1942 to 1944, so we're not really sure what happened in 41. I'm assuming they were living at Frank's. And I'm thinking that's when Vernon might have not been around as much. The war was on, so there was a lot of war work that was going on. But again, we'd have to line all that up. I'm just listing out places that they lived. So from 42 to 44, they rented a house that was owned by Vernon's cousin, Eek, E-A-C-K, who was a son of Noah Presley. So he's Sale's brother. And this house was directly across the street from Noah's house. And its original address was 605 Kelly Street, but I believe it's now 915 Kelly Street, 915. And that's because when East Tupelo was absorbed into Tupelo, they renumbered a bunch of the streets. And then on August 18th, 1945, so again, we have another slight gap, I believe, where we're not exactly sure where they were. Might have still been at this Kelly Street address. But on August 18th, 1945, the Presleys bought a 4-room house for $2,000, and they, with $200 down, so they financed $1,800 of it. And so that total price today would be $34,954. So right at $35,000 is what they paid for a house. But back then it was $2,000. And the balance was split into monthly payments of $30 plus 6% interest. So I don't know what the actual dollar amount of the payments were. And I'm getting this from a reference. I don't actually have a document for this. So we're just referencing a document here. Don't know if these numbers are really true. They were reported by various sources. I've got at least 2 sources listed. So, and these sources I've got must have gotten them from somewhere else because these aren't primary sources. They're probably quoting them from some other books. So I have no idea how much that, every time we transmit this information in any manner, the telephone game comes into play and certain pieces of it won't make it through correctly. And I have no idea how much of this is actually true and not. This is my disclaimer. I'm just a guy reading to you stuff that I have found and put together on my own. Just a fan. Everybody's opinion here is welcome. So if you've got an opinion, feel free to get it into the chat and we'll talk about it. Put it in the comments afterward. And always, give me a like. Give me a subscribe. Tell people who love Elvis about the channel so that they can come and love the videos too. And comment. That's the thing that really drives YouTube to show this video to as many Elvis fans as possible. So they've bought this house. They're paying $30+ a month for it, which $30 would have been about $524 in today's money. So they're probably paying like right at a $600 a month house payment is what it feels like to them, which today is still, fairly reasonable. So again, we're seeing that housing is much more expensive today, square foot for square foot, than it was back then. Which is kind of crazy, but there you have it. We've seen that with all commodities so far. They bought this place from Orville Bean, who is the same guy who Vernon had the $4 check, and then things were done. Forgery was involved. Vernon ended up in prison for a sentence of 3 years. Didn't spend all that time there, but that was Orville Bean. And now he's bought a house from him. Of course, Orville did write the letter that helped to get Vernon released from prison early. Hi, Frederick. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate seeing you here. And Frederick saying that Vernon probably had to register for the draft. And the record, yeah, he definitely had to register for the draft. He was not drafted. He did not serve, but he did work at jobs that were available because of the war, but they weren't in Tupelo. You had to travel to get them. So I know he spent some time away. I just don't know the exact dates of when he was away. Hi, Colleen. Thank you so much for coming. Definitely appreciate seeing you here too. So something happens at this house, this 1240 Berry Street, and Vernon's not able to keep up on the payments. And, this will always be said that he was poor. They were so poor that they weren't that poor because they were able to afford to get into this house in the first place. And Orville's no fool. I doubt he sold this to them thinking that, hey, they'll be out of here in less than a year or so. But by July 18th of 1946, which is less than a year later, Vernon has signed the house over to his friend Aaron Kennedy, who assumes the loan to Orville on July 18th, 1946. So less than a year later, Vernon's out. I don't think Orville anticipated that. Now, did Orville rent to people and then recollect a lot, or sell to people and then end up keeping the house? I'm sure he did. I'm sure that was a regular part of his business. But I don't think he went into any of those transactions with the belief that in the end, I'm going to end up with the house. I think he tried to give people a fair deal, a deal that was, with the market at the time, and work with them to get the payments. But for whatever reason, Vernon couldn't keep up on them. Vernon was a young man. There was a lot of opportunity at the moment, but in 1945, at the very moment that he buys the house, all of that opportunity begins to dry up. Because World War II is over. So they don't need to build all this stuff anymore. Now, there's a whole lot of other opportunities that open up, but the ones that Vernon was exploiting are now gone. And so it's possible that he just doesn't have the steady income to do this. Plus, he's a young man. He wasn't necessarily the best with finances at this point in his life. Now, by the end of his life, I think he was very, very good. I think he rivaled anyone. He could rival any accountant in the field. But at this point, he didn't have that education. He hadn't talked to people who handled money. His experience with money is that you got it and you lost it. Gladys's experience with money is you got it, you lost it, you get more later, but the bad times always roll back around. So they were not, I don't believe, looking to invest money. They weren't saving money. They didn't have money to save. They didn't see it as savable. Just wasn't enough of it. And they doted on Elvis. So I don't believe either of them was really good with money. And the money wasn't flowing as freely at this moment because of the end of World War II and Vernon's occupations. And I don't know what Glass was doing at that moment in terms of earning money. So they ended up not being able to keep this house. So they move over to a place on Berry Street, or on I'm sorry. That was Berry Street. So they moved over now to a house on Commerce Street. And I don't have the number for it, but they rented this house in August of 46. And this house is near the Lee County Courthouse, which is where WELO broadcasts from. And Elvis is friends with a kid about this time whose name is Carvel Lee Osborne. Or I'm sorry, his name is James Osborne. And he has an older brother whose name is Carvel Lee Osborne. And Carvel Lee Osborne is Mississippi Slim, who is a famous or semi-famous or regionally famous personality on the radio, WELO. And so, of course, Elvis meets him. And Elvis is fascinated by this guy who can play this guitar and does stuff on the radio. So it's while he's living at this address on Commerce Street that he really starts to focus in on the radio, because he has an in through his friend James, who is a classmate of his at Lawhorn Elementary and Milham Junior High. So he's known him for a while. And then Vernon and Glass of Presley, they have to move again. So now they rent a house on Mulberry Alley. And this is the one that's near the fairgrounds and in the area known as Shake Rag. So when you hear about Shake Rag, that was this house, the one on Mulberry Alley. And I'm just looking through the comments here. Hi, Roy. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you being here. And now we get to 1010 North Green Street. This is the last place that the Presleys live in Tupelo. Again, it's rented, and they begin living here in September of 1947. And that's actually what we're going to be looking at today. So let me pull up. Well, let's look at this picture that I've got up here first. This is Elvis, I believe, about age 11. So this is the year before they move into the house on 1010. So we've gone from third grade, which I think you're usually like 9 or 10 in third grade. I think you're 10 by the time you get out. So this would have been, maybe I've got that wrong. I can't do math while I'm talking here. But he's about 11, I think, in this picture. I don't think he's quite as old as he is while he lives at North Green Street, but he's real close. And so I thought you guys would be interested in this picture. Now let me pull up some other pictures. All right, this is the contract that we're here to look at today. And I know you guys can't possibly read this contract. But it's just to show you that the contract is real. It's here. Angel saying that her grandson is 9 in third grade. Right. And it's always, Elvis was born at the beginning of the year. So I think he was 8 when he got into third grade and 9 when he left. So he'd have been 10 in fourth grade and 11 when he got out of fifth grade. So this is probably like fifth grade going into sixth grade, I think is when that picture's from. But thank you, Angel. And Frederick's chimed in with the same thing, 8 to 9 in third grade. So yeah, you guys can figure it out, but I think he's about 11. On this form, this is an insurance form, a dwelling and contents form. Now you may ask, Hillbilly Cat History, how do you know that this is real? Why would you even show this to us? Well, if you go to Graceland, you can find this form. It's on display. So everybody in the world that makes it to Graceland can actually see the original of this form. It's somewhere in the displays. I don't remember where. I do remember seeing it when I was there, but they have a lot of buildings and areas. So now I'm going to read it to you. Let's start out here. It says MSRB in a shield. I don't really know what that is. And it doesn't say anywhere on here what that stands for. And I've got no idea. So if you know what MSRB stands for, let me know in the comments below. And then it says Vernon Presley, and Presley's misspelled. It has 2 S's. East Tupelo, Mississippi. It says substituted form, effective April 10th, 1947 to April 23rd, 1949. Oh, well, that's interesting. So let me go back for just a second, because in my notes, which I had assembled from another source, and it was saying that they moved into this address on September 1947. So here live on the air, I'm changing that to April in my notes, 1947, because this document indicates it's April 1947. So you guys got to see part of how history works as you research it live right here on air as we went through this document. And this document obviously overrides anything that I found in any book, because this is the document. Okay, this is Mississippi number 112-P for use in writing fire or fire with extended coverage dwelling and contents form. So this is a fire insurance form in case your stuff gets burned up or your house. And it says NB Class 1-8 inclusive. And then it says change in location, no change in rate or premium. So Vernon's made a change to address, but he's not made a change to the actual policy itself. Yeah, that's important information. That means that Vernon's already insured in some way for fire wherever they were living. And then when he moves to this location, he continues that policy. Now, we don't know when he started the policy, but we know that the policy was in effect before he got to this address. And then it says attached to and forming part of policy number 122013 of the Camden Fire Insurance Company, Camden, New Jersey. So he's got a policy. The Presleys have a policy in Vernon's name, and it covers stuff. We don't know yet what, but we're going to find out. And it's issued at its Tupelo, Mississippi agency, Michener's Insurance Agency, which I'm sure is an agency that's in Tupelo. So I'm kind of making a note to myself right now to look this place up and see if I can find it on a map from the period. This policy covers the following described property. All situated map number 1010 North Green Street. And then it's got written E/S. I have no idea what that is, unless that's the signature of the agent saying, or the initials of the agent saying, hey, I verified that this really is the address. something like that. Otherwise, I don't know what that's indicating. And then it says under number 1, NII, which I believe is maybe an NA for not applicable. It's hard to read on the form, even when you blow it up. So I'm thinking it's saying not applicable, or it's another code that means not applicable. On the approved roof, 1-story frame building occupied by tenant as one family dwelling, including building equipment, fixtures, and outdoor equipment pertaining to the service of the premises, if the property of the owner of the dwelling, while located on the above described premises, but not trees, shrubs, plants, or lawns. And then it's got a couple of clauses about things you could do with 10% of the money. And basically what it's saying is it's willing to cover your dwelling. It's willing to cover like a shed that's outside, but only if it's a shed that houses like equipment, maintenance equipment for the property, like a lawnmower. Okay. If you're using that shed to run a business out of, it's not covered. If you're storing a bunch of lumber for a lumber business in the shed, it's not covered. If you are using it for any reason other than part of the normal living and maintenance of a house, then it's not going to be covered. And then it also extends those rules to what's inside the shed. And it's also indicating that no matter how much you spent on landscaping, you're not getting any of that back. They don't care. And so the thought would be, this is in the event of a fire, I would suppose. Because it doesn't actually say what the event is, other than at the top we saw it was for fire. But whatever this piece is, Vernon doesn't get it. And that's because he's renting the place. So he doesn't really care what happens to it. It's not his problem. What he cares about is what's inside it. His stuff. The things he's bought. That's what number 2 is. And he's got $500 of coverage there. And that's on household and personal property, usual or incidental to the occupancy of the premises as a dwelling, except for aircraft, motor vehicles, and boats, other than rowboats and canoes. And so they won't cover anything with a motor, but if you had a canoe or a rowboat, that would come under this policy. And including household and personal property purchased under an installment plan. Okay, that's really important. Installment plan means you bought something you haven't got it all paid for yet. You're paying for it. So you don't, it's kind of like rent to own. But in this case, you own it and you're just trying to pay it off. It's an early form of credit, and they still do this, right? And we're going to see that Vernon and Gladys have purchased property on installment plans, so they may be worried about that. So in addition to the installment plan property, unusual or incidental to a dwelling, belonging to the insured or for which the insured may be liable, or at the option of the insured belonging to a member of the family of the insured or to a servant thereof, while contained in the above described dwelling or appurtenant private structures, or while on the above described premises. So here it's saying that maybe you've got stuff that a family member owns, which, because you're the insured, your wife's not necessarily named in this policy. But maybe she has property too. And maybe your kid has property. And then maybe you've got a relative that's living with you, like your brother or your sister. They've got property. Or maybe they've left property over at your house. All your stuff burns up. You want to be able to return their property. The appurtenant private structure, that's like a mother-in-law's quarters. Something that's probably like attached to the house, or like a shed where somebody lives in it. So it's part of the dwelling, but it's not, it usually doesn't have direct access into the dwelling. And then it's got some riders on that. Or not riders, but it's a couple of options you can do with this 10% thing of the amount specified in item 2. And it's basically saying that you could take like some of your property somewhere else, anywhere within the continental North America, including the United States of America, Alaska, the Dominion of Canada, and Newfoundland, and you'd still be covered if something happened to it. But as long as any of that money that's being covered doesn't go directly to another carrier, so they don't want to help anybody else out in the business. Any loss that you collect on, you need to keep that collection. That's yours. I'm sure there's some kind of a scam that they're addressing with that, but I'm not exactly sure what scam it would have been at the time. And then if their loss, if any, under item 2 shall be adjusted with the insured specifically named and shall be payable to him unless other payee is specifically named hereunder, and the total is $500. So what they're saying here is that Vernon's name is on the policy. They're not going to give the money to anybody but Vernon. They don't care who owned the property. So if your brother's living with you, his stuff got burned up, and you're like, hey, I'm going to give him part of this $500, they're like, we don't care. We don't give it to your brother. It's only to you, no matter what you were covering with it, and then you decide how it gets split up after that. But it's also saying that, you know, they're not going to give the money to Gladys. They're not going to give the money to Elvis unless there's already been, Vernon has already put in written instructions to do that, or Vernon's no longer available because he's no longer, you know, he's not with us anymore. Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. It also indicates that it's payable to him. So within the form is a reflection of the society at the time that females would not be filling out these insurance forms. They wouldn't be covered. Now, could a female get covered? I would assume they could, but the boilerplate forms predispose everyone's thinking to the fact that it's going to be a male. And then it says insurance attaches hereunder only to those items for which an amount is shown in the space provided, therefore, and not exceeding said amount under each item. So this is indicating that there's another page, and on that page, items that the Presleys own are written. Fortunately, we don't have that page, but it sure would be fun to look at, right? Like, it must exist because it's part of it. Now, it may not be part of this form. It may be part of the original policy. And then the insurance agent will just file this with the original policy. And then that's the, you know, that list of stuff is what will be covered because this is a change form. But there is an indication that, you know, at least this form exists somewhere with a list of the Presley's property. And it is a condition of this insurance that in the event the insured elects to apply the 10% optional provisions of items 1 or 2, this company shall not be liable for a greater protection of any loss than would have been the case if similar election were made under optional provisions of all policies pertaining to the same property. So they're just limiting their liability with this particular clause. And you know what's going to be fun is when we get to the Colonel's contracts, and you've already seen these boilerplate contracts that already exist within Elvis's time, and then you compare the Colonel's contracts to these. It's going to be eye-opening. But let's look here at extended coverage. Perils of windstorm, hail, explosion, riot attending a strike, civil commotion, aircraft, vehicles, except as hereunder provided. Coverage of the perils indicated in the above caption in accordance with and subject to all the terms and conditions for the coverage appearing on the reverse side of this form will be in effect only in consideration of an additional premium amount specifically inserted herein. Additional premium, and it's marked included. So this is like a freebie that they give you with the policy that Vernon has. And it sounds like, oh, I've got this extended, fascinating, you know, great coverage. Well, they're giving it to you because they don't really expect to ever pay out on it. It's like accidental death and dismemberment coverage. Very, very few people ever die in an accident. And so if you statistically. Okay, so if you're an insurance company and you're selling life insurance, when you sell it to an employer, for a few cents more on every policy, you include accidental death and dismemberment. And the cents are so low because it's below $1. And in today's society, anything that's below $1, I mean, for a month of coverage is, and the coverage is equal to the dollar amount of the base policy. So if you have, say, $100,000 life insurance policy, your accidental death and dismemberment is also $100,000. So you've paid for $100,000 worth of coverage with like a quarter or 50 cents, or even 99 cents. It's an incredible deal. But it's an incredible deal because the statistics say it's not going to happen to you. So they do pay out accident claims, but they're very few compared to the number of regular life claims that are paid out. That's why they love to add that coverage. Now, the dismemberment part means some part of you gets cut off, like an arm or a leg or an eye, and then they pay you out a specified dollar amount based on the body part. That occurs even less frequently, which is why it's automatically included with accidental death. They just already added the dismemberment on, and then they sell it to you as being so cheap that you can't pass it up, and you can't. And so the employer packages it with the regular life insurance policy, and then usually the employer pays for some certain amount of the life insurance policy, and then they offer to you as the employee a chance to purchase more, which also includes extra accidental death and dismemberment. But that's kind of how the insurance business works. And this is a clause that's showing that even in 1947, this was part of the business. They were giving you what looked like a great deal for free because it didn't cost them much money. All right. And the next part says, unearned premium clause appearing on the reverse side of this form will become effective subject to its provisions and consideration for an additional premium next specifically inserted herein, and this additional premium is included. So, I believe what an unearned premium clause is, and I'm not actually positive. Probably should have looked it up before I got here because we don't have the back of this page. But I believe it means if somehow you've overpaid for the coverage, because insurance companies have to, and I believe even back then, and probably more so back then, had to prove to the government that they weren't making an unfair amount off of people. So they couldn't just collect massive amounts of premium and never pay out any claims. That would be illegal. They have to prove very carefully how the claims went out, and then if they've made a premium or a profit above a certain point, they usually have to reinvest that somehow into like the community or the company, or there's different ways, pay it in taxes. There's different ways to get around it if you end up in that situation, which they kind of do like all the time, but they're really good at it now. So they almost never show it on the books that way, but they would get caught for it. You know, they found creative ways to make sure that this never happened. One of them was they would return premium to the premium payer. So like if you held the policy, and maybe you've seen this happen with some insurance that you've had, you get this refund check that doesn't make any sense, and it's for like $3 or $4 or maybe 30, you know, and you're like, why do I have this check? It says unearned premium. Well, that's what it is. They've readjusted the premiums because they quoted you too high. Now, in fact, I even got this back last year on health insurance, which is insanity because I pay a massive amount for the health insurance, and they send me back like $30. Like, oh, for the whole 12 months, you've overpaid. Well, I'm glad that I've overpaid by the $30 you sent it back for the 12 months, but the whole thing seems ridiculous because by the time they've paid somebody to figure this all out and done the administration, we probably spent my $30, but that's neither here nor there. And Angel's saying for everybody to come out of the bushes and please hit that like button. Please do. If you like what's going on here and you're learning something today, hit that like button so that we can continue to do this all the time with more and more stories I have a never-ending supply of Elvis information that you've never seen. I can guarantee that, and I'm going to keep pumping it out for all of you, because you're my loyal viewers who keep coming, and I really appreciate it. Especially those of you that are in the chat right this minute. And then this thing says continued on the back hereof, and we don't have that back. We've only got the front available because that's what they show you at Graceland. But just to give you some history of 1010 North Green Street, let's take a look at this picture here. So this is a picture of Elvis on a bicycle. And if you have been to Graceland recently, you have seen this bicycle. Okay, this is the bicycle that Ashley from Ashley's Adventures noticed hanging up in a picture in this smoke shack where Elvis and the guys used to shoot guns. So it's out by Vernon's office, and you walk by it in the tour, and you get to look inside, and it's just like a little small wooden area, like a little room, and the guys would fire guns into there, and then they onto the wall in the back, basically. This bicycle was hanging there in pieces for apparently since Elvis moved in, or somewhere around that, until Ashley noticed it about like 5 or 6 or maybe 8 years ago. It's not been a whole decade. And Ashley at the time was really friendly with the spa guy, and he had nicknamed her Ashley Drew after Nancy Drew, the detective girl. And she would send him all kinds of pictures. And then she sent the picture of the smoke house and saying, is this possibly Elvis's first bicycle? And he started looking into it and somehow caught the attention of Graceland. And Spa Guy ended up on an episode of Gates of Graceland where they had restored the bicycle. Angie Marchese verified that it really was the bicycle. It's now been restored and it's on display. Unfortunately, during that period, Spa Guy and Ashley split, which I believe was because the Spa Guy would refer to her as his sidekick, and she started her own channel, called it Ashley's Adventures, and she's been putting out some amazing stuff where she basically pulls pictures, mostly of Graceland. She's very Graceland focused, and she shows you things that are in the pictures that I doubt you've ever noticed, even though they're right in front of your face. So if you like pictures of Graceland and deep dives into stuff like that, you should check out Ashley's Adventures. And then the Spa Guy, of course, he would take some of those pictures and he would go to the locations, and then he would verify things that she thought about the locations. So she was very important to his beginning in that. And that's about the time Trey came on board. So those of you who watch Trey and Spa Guy and Ashley, it's just a little bit of the history of how they all came together. But it's not really about Elvis or this picture. About the bike a little bit, but this picture's taking at 110 North Green Street, or very, very close to it. During that period of time, he would have been living at that house. Spa Guy believes the picture is from that location. And in fact, talking about this, I'm going to drop in the chat a link. And this is a link to the Spa Guy's video about the location. So the house is long gone, but you can go to this video and you can see where the Spa Guy believes the location is. And he tries to get down to not just about where it was, but to where exactly it was. I don't think he's totally successful within the video, but it is a great video to watch and see how he goes about these things. But the point of bringing up this picture is so that I can tell about this, this place that they lived on North Green Street. It was where the townspeople called it the Hill. And it was a prosperous black community. And only 3 of the houses in this area were rented by white people. And of those 3 white families, Elvis was the only white child. And this is where Elvis ran around with a guy named Sam Bell and a kid named Humpy. I'm not sure who Humpy is, but that was his nickname. And they all ran together. So it was 2 black kids and Elvis, Sam Bell and Humpy, and Elvis. And Elvis and Sam were particularly close friends. And if you go out and you Google Sam Bell, you can find a few interviews with Sam Bell, especially video interviews. And Baz Luhrmann did interview him for the Baz film that they put out in 2022. So he has some recent stuff out there. Sam's a guy worth going to talk to, or listening to talk to, and listening to his memories. And then Roy Turner, and I'm going to quote Roy Turner here. And of course, Roy is the guy that runs the Elvis birthplace. And we've looked at him before, and I gave a link to an article, and this is actually from the same article. It's quoted, "They would eat with each other's families, have sleepovers in each other's houses. Sam's grandparents, who raised Sam, thought the world of little 13-year-old Elvis. He would say, 'Yes, ma'am,' and 'Yes, sir,' to them at a time when white people did not show African Americans that kind of respect." So there is a quote directly from Roy about, and I'm sure you guys have heard all kinds of myths about racism and all kinds of other things connected to Elvis. But here, as a 12-year-old boy, going on 13, just before he moves to Memphis, 2 of his best friends are African American. And Turner also says that there was a doctor that lived in that area, an African American doctor. And when Jet published an article accusing Elvis of racism, this doctor wrote a letter to the editor of the Jet magazine, and he said he knew Elvis as a little boy. And here's what Roy says, quote, "He told them, 'I never saw anything racist in that child. For a doctor, a busy man, the only African-American physician up there at the time, to go to that trouble, well, he wanted to set the record straight. He knew that kid, and he knew that story was wrong.'" So this house is connected to this doctor writing a letter at a much later period when Elvis is long gone to Jet magazine to say, "Hey, you have maligned Elvis Presley, that I knew him as a person and as a child, and he is not who you are making him out to be." L. Knowlton, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate having you here. And you're saying recently joined your channel and really enjoying it. I really appreciate hearing that, because the channel only survives as long as people enjoy what I'm putting out and like to hear these stories, real, true Elvis facts. And Frederick saying an actor replaced Sam Bell in Elvis Evolution. Then towards the end of the show, the video of the real Sam Bell interviewed as an older man. Have not seen Elvis Evolution, so thank you for that, Frederick. I would assume most of us here have not seen that. And Martha's saying this is a very interesting channel. Thank you so much, Martha. I really appreciate hearing that from you. I know that you check out a lot of the Elvis channels, so I know that when you say that a channel is interesting, that it really, really is, and that means a lot to me. And so we got about 10 minutes left, and I've got more of this story to go. And so let me get into this part of it. And this part is going to move us away from the time period and not the bicycle, but the address. And let's look here. We see another picture of Elvis. He's a little taller, got the same bicycle. Okay. This picture is a famous picture. Showed up about 2014. Okay. And it's connected to somebody in the Elvis YouTube community that I bet a lot of you guys know. And you've maybe watched him. And it's a guy named Wade is his name. But he goes by the Elvis Cup guy. Okay, and I don't know how many of you enjoy the Elvis Cup guy or have watched him or listened to what he has to say. He's not at the top of my favorites list. And, you know, it's because I think that he exaggerates what pieces of Elvis he does have. He has a few like this picture. And so let me tell you the story about this picture. But I gotta pull up something here to make sure I tell you the story right. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Okay, so this, I think it came out probably 2013 is when he actually released this picture. And it's Wade Jones, the Elvis Cup guy, and he's quoted as saying, I had never seen this image in my life, but he had received it in some stuff he bought that was from the late Janelle McComb. Now, Janelle, if you go and look up her name, McComb, McComb, you'll find a lot of stuff about her out on the net connected to Elvis. She was a Tupelo friend of his, and she was very connected to the birthplace. And she visited Elvis many times at Graceland. And she wrote poems for him and that he really enjoyed. They traded gifts back and forth. When they opened the chapel at the birthplace, she donated a Bible. She donated a Bible. And that Bible was there for a while. And I don't remember if it was in the chapel or whether it was in the little church, but somebody went and stole it. You know, so that Bible is now no longer available to us. It's been stolen, but it came straight from Janelle McComb, and she said she'd gotten it straight from Elvis. So that's a piece that we've lost. And then after she passed away, somehow other pieces have moved around. Wayne ended up with this piece. And he saw this picture and he knew it was special, but he didn't know exactly what was special about it. But he knew he hadn't seen it. So he put it up on eBay, but not to sell it as the original, to sell copies of it. And he partially obscured the image to keep it from being copied. And some European fan paid $361.68 in late 2013 to get a hold of a copy of this picture. Media requests poured into him. Graceland contacted him. Suddenly, the Cup guy is the middle of everything. And this is really what boosts the Cup guy, because he has this styrofoam cup that he tells the story about, but it hasn't really brought him the fame that he had hoped for. This thing kind of did. And a lot of people got together on this picture, and they decided this picture. Well, here's what Roy Turner had to say about it. Quote, "There is no doubt in my mind that it is Elvis." But he couldn't figure out where it was taken at. And so Roy said, if anybody would know, it's Sam Bell. So Sam looks at it and he says, quote, "Yeah, I know that's him. That's the way he'd be looking. That's the way he'd be dressed. And the bike too. That's what we rode, those type of bikes." So Sam does verify that this is Elvis and the bike, and he's correct about that. It's Elvis and the bike. And then Sam goes on to say Elvis wouldn't have been running around by himself. Well, this is after Sam knows him, so maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. Back in Tupelo, probably not, because Sam saw Gladys as a person who watched Elvis carefully And she stopped them from having fun sometimes because she would get in the middle of their fun because she didn't think they should be doing what they were doing because they were young boys. So Sam identifies this picture as having been taken in Tupelo. Unfortunately, this picture is not taken in Tupelo. This picture is taken in Memphis. And the spa guy later proves that it's taken in Memphis. And I've actually been to the telephone pole. It's still there, as well as this store that you can see behind it. That whole building is still there, as well as the telephone pole. I took my picture in front of the telephone pole. I saw a bunch of other people with me. We all took our pictures there in front of that telephone pole. It's in Memphis. So Elvis has transported the bike when they moved to Memphis. He rides the bike around Memphis. This is one of the places that he goes. It's a drugstore. It's got a pinball machine in it. He likes to come up and play the pinball machine and, get a chocolate soda or something every once in a while. And that's why he's hanging out in front of this drugstore at this telephone pole. Now, we know about this, and it got to be so big because Alana Nash, she's kind of a fangirl for Elvis, really. Now, Alana, wonderful writer. She's written some great books. Like Peter Goralnik, she's one of the most respected people in the field. When she says something, you gotta, put weight behind it. She doesn't know where this picture was taken either. She takes Wade's and Sam's word for it and prints this article and basically weighs in that it's from his hometown. And the title of the article is Elvis as a teen, see a never before published photo from his hometown in Tupelo, Mississippi. So she jumped the gun here and she decided that this picture was from Tupelo, but it wasn't. It was from Memphis. Okay, and so the reason that I'm bringing this up is that Alana wrote a book about the Colonel, and she makes a very nasty accusation about the Colonel in it, links him to a murder, and all she has to link him to the murder is physical proximity in a city where there's a whole bunch of other people in that same proximity. And she forces that myth to be carried with him because somebody else had attached it to him. But it's her publication that really nails it to the Colonel. But as you can see here with the bicycle, sometimes she jumps to conclusions about things. And that's all I'm trying to point out. Now, that doesn't mean I don't jump to conclusions and that I don't say the wrong thing and that I haven't published within my videos incorrect information or on these live streams. I certainly have. And I catch some of it as I watch back through these live streams. And the live streams are truly live in the fact that I'm bringing you information I have not fully reviewed. I have not lined everything up. I'm working through it with you. We're all coming to conclusions together. I'm using what you're putting into the comments to spark my own thoughts about what might be here and whatnot. So it's very important that you guys participate and let me know what you're thinking. And if you've seen these pieces before, and if you haven't, and if you knew these pieces of information, all of that's important to me because it tells me what's really out there, what people really know, and why some of these pieces like this picture can come out and everyone believed that they were from a certain spot when they were actually from far, far away. And this isn't the only time this has happened within the Elvis community. So just an interesting piece. And I would never say that the Cup guy is not qualified to talk about Elvis. But I do feel, recently this week, we had another Elvis creator that indicated that people need to be qualified to talk about Elvis, and I would never want to say that. And then this thing with the Cup guy slaps me in the face, and I think, well, maybe just one guy, but that's why we can't go there. Everybody's got to have their opinion about Elvis. Everybody's got to be able to say their piece, because if Wade had not felt free enough to try to sell that picture, we wouldn't know about that picture, and we would have never connected it back to Memphis, and Spa Guy wouldn't have been able to use it to help prove that that bicycle hanging in the smokehouse was the real bicycle and needed to be refurbished, which it now has been, and it's sitting on display at Graceland. And that's really it for me for today. So let me just look real quick through the comments. And Frederick's saying at the start of, I think it's the Elvis, I think he'd just been talking about you're in the waiting room lounge before they would let you into Elvis's 1968 special recording session. It's made to look like the real facility in Burbank. And Sam Bell shows up and he wants to see his old friend Elvis. That's interesting. And then Frederick saying it's getting a bunch of criticism because there's no hologram. Yeah, they really had promised that hologram, but it was still entertaining. And that's why you'd never overpromise. Always overdeliver, underpromise, overdeliver. And Angel saying, thanks so much, Matt. Well, thank you for coming and listening. And until I see you guys all again next time, I'm going to say, you all keep on taking care of business.